Have you ever walked through a place so still it feels as though time has chosen to rest? They're not frozen, but softened, like light through old glass. That is the quiet world of Woolsthorpe Manor in Lincolnshire on an autumn afternoon in the late 1600s, where the breeze moves slowly through the orchard and the only sound is the rustle of dry leaves brushing against each other before falling to the earth. Close your eyes now, and let your breath settle into a gentle rhythm. Unhurried and deep, you are standing beneath an old apple tree, its branches heavy with fruit, its bark rough and sun-warmed beneath your fingertips. The air carries the scent of damp soil, ripe apples, and wood smoke drifting from a distant chimney. A few yards away, a small stone cottage nestles in the curve of a gentle hill, its windows golden with afternoon light. Inside, a fire crackles softly in the hearth, and beside it, a boy sits in silence, his hands busy with gears, string, and sketches spread across a worn wooden table. This is the world of Isaac Newtonot, the world of monuments and equations, but the world of solitude and curiosity, where ideas grow not with fanfare, but with the quiet persistence of roots pushing through dark earth. He is not yet a name in history, not yet a legend in textbooks. He is simply a boy who watches shadows move across the floor, who wonders why the flame leans when the door opens, who feels the weight of questions no one else seems to carry. As we step into his life together, let your mind remain with me, open to every detail, not as facts to be memorized, but as moments to be felt. If you wish, share where in time or where in the world you are listening from, and I will hold your presence with gratitude as part of this journey. And if you would like to return for another story, another quiet hour among the great minds and forgotten voices of history, follow the channel and I'll be here, waiting to welcome you back with the same stillness and care. The afternoon light deepens now, turning amber, spilling across the orchard in long, slow strokes. A single apple detaches from its branch with a soft sigh and falls not with a crash, but with the quiet certainty of something returning to where it belongs. Somewhere inside the cottage, a candle has been lit, its flame steady and small, casting a circle of warmth on the pages of a notebook. You can almost hear the scratch of the quill, the pause before the next word, the breath before the thought is finished. Around you, the countryside breathes slowly. Sheep graze in the distance, their bells faint and rhythmic. A cart rattles along a dirt road, wheels creaking in time with the driver's hum. Smoke curls from a dozen chimneys, each one a sign of a life being lived one meal at a time. One stitch, one prayer, one question. In T's world, knowledge is not shouted from rooftops. It is gathered like firewood, carefully, patiently, one twig at a time. Somewhere in Cambridge, students gather in candlelit halls, debating Aristotle and scripture in low, measured tones. In London, printers set type by hand, ink staining their fingers as they prepare the first pages of a new age. In Paris, astronomers lean over brass instruments, tracing the path of a comet across the sky. And in this quiet corner of England, a young man sits alone, writing in the margins of old books, searching not for fame, but for understanding. Tonight, all of that is still unfolding. None of it is finished. None of it is even named yet. The great work that will one day be called Principia Mathematica exists only as a few scattered notes, as a question whispered to the dark. What holds the moon in its path? And the answer, when it comes, will arrive not with thunder, but with the same quiet weight as that apple falling to the grass. You are not here to witness a legend. You are here to walk beside a man flawed, brilliant, tender, and stubbornness. He listens to the world in a way no one else has dared. Let your mind soften now to the pace of candlelight and parchment, to the rhythm of footsteps on a gravel path, to the silence between thoughts. We will begin not with his fame, nor with his laws, but with the world that shaped him. A world lit by candlelight and uncertainty. Let us step into it together gently, and without hurry. Imagine a world where knowledge travels slowly on horseback, in handwritten letters, folded and sealed with wax, in the murmured words of scholars gathered around a single candle after supper. This is the world of the 1600s, a century balanced between reverence and revolution, where the heavens are still mapped with scripture as much as with stars, and where a single question why can be both a prayer and a rebellion. The year is not yet fixed in the mind of the common person. Calendars shift with the authority of kings and popes. In England, the old Julian reckoning lingers, 10 days behind the Gregorian system used in Rome. Time is told not by precision, but by the church bell, the position of the sun, the length of a shadow across the yard. Days begin with the crow of a rooster, not the chime of a clock. Nights are long, deep, and filled with sound. The creak of floorboards, the whisper of embers, the distant howl of a fox crossing fallow fields. In villages across Europe, life moves with the rhythm of the seasons. Spring is the turning of soil, the smell of damp earth and manure, the first green shoots pushing through. Summer is the heat on the back of the neck, the drone of bees in the clover, the weight of a scythe in calloused hands. Autumn brings apples, nuts, and the sharp tang of fermenting cider. And winter is a time of inward turning, of stories told by firelight, of bread rationed, of wool spun by hand, of candles saved for special hours. Most people never leave the county of their birth. A trip to the nearest market town is an event prepared for days in advance. Shoes polished, goods carefully bundled. Children reminded to hold hands and keep quiet near the livestock pens. Roads are narrow, uneven, often muddy deep ruts, carved by cartwheels, puddles that reflect the sky like broken mirrors. Travel is not adventure. It is endurance. Inside homes, light is precious. A single tallow candle burns low in an iron holder, its flame flickering in the draught from a poorly sealed window. The scent is thick animal fat, smoke, herbs drying from the rafters, the faint sweetness of apples stored in the loft. Walls are whitewashed or hung with rough tapestries to keep the cold at bay. Floors are of packed earth or wide, uneven planks, worn smooth by generations of footsteps. Books are rare. A family Bible may be the only volume in the house, its pages softened by use, its margins filled with births, deaths, and notes in fading ink. In wealthier homes, perhaps a few more volumes rest on a shelf. A herbal, a book of prayers, a battered copy of the Fairy Queen or Donkey, passed from hand to hand like an heirloom. To own a library is to possess a kind of quiet power and to guard it carefully. Universities exist, but they are not what we imagine today. At Cambridge and Oxford, young men wear long gowns, debate in Latin, and copy lectures by hand into notebooks bound in leather. Learning is not about discovery, but about mastery, of Aristotle, of Euclid, of the Church Fathers. To question is not forbidden, but it is dangerous. Authority rests not in evidence, but in tradition. Truth is what has always been said, and yet there are whispers. In hidden corners, men gather in private rooms to grind lenses, to measure the swing of a pendulum, to record the path of a comet across the sky. In Prague, an emperor collects strange machines and alchemical texts. In Florence, a man turns a polished tube toward the moon and sees mountains where none were supposed to be. In London, a society meets in secrecy, calling itself the Royal Society, committed to a new creed. Nalias? And Verba take no one's word for it. The printing press has been turning for over a century, and though censorship is fierce, ideas slip through like water through stone. A pamphlet appears in a tavern. A letter is read aloud in a scholar's study. A diagram of planetary orbits circulates, and Capit its lines careful and trembling. The world is still largely a place of faith, of hierarchy, of fixed roles, but underneath, something is shifting. Not loudly, not suddenly, but like the slow creep of ivy up a stone wall, a new way of seeing is beginning to take hold. It is into this world fragile, layered, half-lit, that Isaac Newton is born, not into chaos, but into quiet, not into certainty, but into a time when the very ground of knowledge is softening, ready perhaps for one mind to press down and leave an imprint that will not fade. Outside, the wind stirs the thatch on the roof of a small Lincolnshire farmhouse. A candle gutters in its holder. A woman hums softly as she rocks a cradle. And far above, the same stars turn in their ancient course scene, unchanged and waiting. In the quiet of a Lincolnshire winter, where the days shrink inward and the cold settles deep into the stone walls of the manor, a boy sits by the hearth, not reading, not playing, not speaking, but watching. His name is Isaac. He is small for his age, with eyes that linger on things longer than most children would think to look. He does not run with the village boys. He does not join the games in the yard. Instead, he builds with twine and scraps of wood, with clock parts salvaged from broken mechanisms, with candle wax and wire. He constructs small worlds that move, that spin, that click into place with satisfying precision. The firelight flickers across his hand, slender, careful, already marked with the tiny nicks and scratches of someone who works with tools too large for his fingers. His breath is steady as he adjusts the angle of a tiny windmill's sails, testing how the draft from the chimney makes them turn. He does not smile often, but when he does, it is not at people, it is at patterns, at the way smoke curls upward in spirals, at the symmetry of frost on the window, at the quiet hum a stretched string makes when plucked just so. He was born 3 months premature, in the first days of January, 1643 though, and the old reckoning, it was still 1642. His father, a farmer, had died before he drew his first breath. His mother, Hannah, remarried when he was 3, and left him behind to live with her new husband in a nearby parish. For 9 years, he did not see her. No letters, no visits, just silence. And silence, for Isaac, became a companion, not an enemy. He grew accustomed to its weight, learned to speak not with words, but with objects. He carved models of carts with working axles, built sundials accurate to the minute, rigged a paper lantern to float like a firefly across the pond behind the house. He measured the wind by how far a feather traveled in a breath. He timed the swing of a pewter spoon hanging from a string, counting the beats against his own pulse. At school in Grantham, he is not the brightest in the classical sense. He speaks little Latin, struggles with Greek poetry, but the master notices something else. When Isaac copies a diagram from Euclid, his lines are straighter than anyone else's. When the class is given an open question, why does a kite rise? Why does a reflection flip left and right but not up and down? He's the only one who writes 2 full pages in careful script, not to impress, but because the question will not leave him alone. He walks home each afternoon with his satchel slung low, his gaze on the ground not in shame, but in attention. He sees how rainwater gathers in the ruts of the road, how it flows in thin, branching paths, always finding the lowest point. He notices how light bends when it passes through a glass of water on the windowsill, how the letters of a book seem to shift when viewed through it. He does not call it refraction. He does not yet have the word, but he feels the wonder. At night, he lies awake not with fear, but with inquiry. The stars above Woolsthorpe are bright in the absence of city light, sharp points scattered across a velvet dark. He wonders if they move, or if it is only the earth turning beneath them. He wonders why the moon does not fall, if everything else does. He wonders why, when he closes his eyes tight and then opens them, the afterimage lingers not as a memory, but as a ghost of light still clinging to the inside of his eyelids. His stepfather, a clergyman, believes learning should serve faith and discipline, order. He cannot understand this boy who dismantles clocks to see how time is kept, who stays up past curfew sketching. Curves in the margins of his Bible, not blasphemy, but geometry. The arc of a throne, stone the ellipse of a planet's imagined path. Isaac does not rebel. He obeys. But obedience, for him, is surface deep. Beneath it, his mind moves like water, underground quiet. Persistent, carving channels no one else can see. And yet there is tenderness in him. When his half-siblings are born, he does not resent them. He constructs toys for them. A rocking horse with real joints. A dollhouse with tiny hinges on the doors. He teaches his younger sister to count the rings in a cross-section of wood, to tell the age of a tree by its silence. He does not speak much, but when he does, it is precis gentle, as if each word has been weighed before release. He is not lonely in the way we often imagine, loneliness not aching for company, but attuned to a different frequency. The world speaks to him in patterns, in forces, in light and motion, and he listens not with his ears alone, but with his whole body. The tilt of his head, the stillness of his hands, the slight narrowing of his eyes when something almost makes sense. One afternoon, after a storm has passed and the orchard glistens with droplets, he kneels beside a puddle where the sky is perfectly reflected. A leaf drifts. Onto the surface, the image shivers clouds, trees, the outline of the cottage all broken, then slowly reassembling as the water calms. He watches for a long time. No one calls him. No one interrupts. And in that moment, he is not the boy who was left. Not the student who sits at the back. Not the future knight, the president of the Royal Society, the name in every physics textbook. He is simply a child who has discovered something essential. The world can be broken and still, given time, it finds its way back to wholeness. He stands, brushes the damp from his knees, and walks back toward the house hands in his pockets. Eyes on the horizon, already thinking of how to build a mirror that bends light not by accident, but by design. The road to Cambridge is not wide, not smooth, not welcoming. It winds through patchwork fields and hedgerows, past villages where smoke rises straight into the still morning air. The cart creaks with every rut, its wooden wheels groaning like an old man stretching after sleep. Inside, wrapped in a woolen coat slightly too large for his frame, sits Isaac's 17 years old, eyes fixed not on the passing countryside, but on the bundle in his lap, a notebook, its cover plain, its pages blank. He does not speak much on the journey. He listens instead to the clop of hooves, to the sigh of wind through bare branches, to the distant chime of a church bell marking the hour. His mind is already ahead, not racing, but settling like dust after a door has closed into the space where learning happens. Not as performance, not as competition, but as quiet communion. Trinity College rises slowly on the horizon, pale stone softened by centuries of rain, its towers catching the low winter light. Ivy climbs the walls in thick ropes, its leaves dark green against the gray. Bells toll from the chapel as he steps down onto the cobbles, his boots clicking faintly against the worn stone. A porter nods, takes his name, and gestures toward a narrow staircase spiraling upward into shade. His room is small, a narrow bed, a wooden desk stained with ink and candle wax, a single window facing east so the morning light enters clean and direct. There is no ornament, no portrait, only the essentials: a lamp, a quill, a pot of ink, and 2 shelves of books some inherited, some borrow, all read cover to cover. Morit annonce. At first, he follows the prescribed path. He attends lectures on Aristotle, on logic, on rhetoric. He copies notes in careful script, his letters neat, his margins wide as if leaving space for something else to arrive later. But soon, something shifts. Not rebellion, not defiance, just divergence. He begins to linger after lectures, not to speak but to observe. In the college garden, he watches how sunlight filters through a cracked pane of glass, how the beam bends as it passes into water held in a basin. He brings back a prism from the natural philosophy collection, small, triangular, cool to the touch end, sets it on his windowsill one afternoon, angling it just so, and then it happens. A beam of white light enters the room. It strikes the prism, and from the other side, instead of white, there spills a ribbon of color. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet soft, luminous, trembling slightly in the dust-moted air. He does not exclaim. He does not call for witnesses. He simply watches his breath steady, his hands still until the sun moves and the spectrum fades. Then he reaches for his notebook. He sketches to set up. The window, the prism, the beam, the wall. He labels the colors in Latin, then in English, then crosses one out and writes another word, searching for the closest truth. He tests again the next day, and the next, changing the angle, the distance, the thickness of the glass. He places a second prism in the path of the colored light and watches, with quiet awe, as the colors recombine into white. This is not magic. It is not divine revelation. It is something quieter, deeper, recognition. The world is not as it seems, but it is not arbitrary either. Beneath the surface, there is structure. There are rules not imposed by kings or churches, but written into the fabric of things themselves. He begins to fill his notebook, not with summaries, but with questions. Why does light bend? Is color in the light or in the eye? If white is a mixture, what else is not what it appears to be? He reads Kepler. He studies He pores over Euclid's elements until the diagrams live in his mind not as abstractions, but as landscapes he can walk through. He copies Galileo's descriptions of falling bodies and wonders, what if the same force that pulls an apple to the ground also holds the moon in its path? No one hears him ask this. Not yet. He builds a small reflecting telescope, not because he wants to see farther, but because he wants to see clearer. The lenses of the time blur at the edges, distort the image. He grinds his own mirror from a disc of speculum metal, polishing it with rouge and pitch until his reflection stares back, sharp and unflinching. When he points it at the moon, he sees craters not as blemishes, but as proof. The heavens are not perfect spheres. They are places. They have terrain. They obey physics. He does not publish. He does not present. He writes in the margins of borrowed books tiny, precise notes that argue with the author, correct an assumption, propose an alternative. His handwriting tightens when he is excited, not with haste, but with concentration, like a hand gripping the edge of a revelation. Sometimes late at night, when the college is quiet and the only sound is the slow drip of melting snow from the eaves, he sits with his back to the fire and reads scripture, not to prove doctrine, but to search for harmony. He believes God did not create chaos. He created order hidden, perhaps, but discoverable. To study nature is not to doubt faith. It is to kneel in a different way. One evening, a senior fellow passes his open door and poses not at the sight of books, but at the sight of arrangement. The desk is not cluttered. It is orchestrated. Diagrammas are pinned in sequence. Instruments rest in exact positions. Even the ash in the hearth has been smoothed into a flat plane, as if he had traced a curve into it and then erased it, leaving only the memory of the line. The fellow does not enter. He simply nods, once, and walks on. Isaac does not notice. He is watching the flame of his candle, how it flickers in a draught, how its shape changes with the slightest movement of air. He wonders if fire, too, follows a law. If heat has weight, if light has speed. He turns the page and writes, I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself I seem only like a boy playing on the seashore, diverting myself in now and then, finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary. He does not finish the sentence. He leaves it open like a door left ajar, because the notebook is no longer just paper and ink. It is a basil, a quiet arc, carrying a universe still, forming fragile, luminous, and utterly unknown. And somewhere, deep in the stacks of the college library, an old copy of Euclid's Elements waits on a shelf, untouched for months. Soon, it will find its way into his hands, and nothing, not light, not motion, not time itself, will ever be seen the same way again. The air in Cambridge grows thin, not from altitude, but from absence. One by one, the voices fade. The lecturer's measured cadence in the hall, the rustle of pages in the library, the laughter of students walking back from the river at dusk. Doors close. Shutters descend. A letter arrives at Trinity College, its seal unbroken for 2 days before a porter finally opens it. The university is suspended until further notice. Return to your homes, do not linger. Isaac does not panic. He folds his notes with care, ties his books with twine, and packs his small instruments, the prism, the reflecting telescope. The brass woods into a wooden case lined with wool. He walks to the stables, where the horses stand still in the cool morning light, their breath visible in the air like soft smoke. The journey back to Woolsthorpe is quiet, the cartwheels turning over dried mud and fallen leaves, the landscape opening around him as the city recedes behind a veil of mist. At the manor, The world feels smaller, slower, deeper. The orchard is bare now, its branches like ink lines against a pale winter sky. Inside, the fire burns low in the hearth, casting long shadows that shift with every breath of wind through the chimney. His mother greets him not with questions, but with a bowl of warm broth and a blanket folded over the back of his chair. She knows without needing to ask that this is not a visit. This is a retreat, a return to the soil, to the silence, to the space where thought can settle like dust after a storm. The plague does not reach Woolsthorpe. It circles nearby villages to the south. Report sickness graves dug in haste. Church bells tolling for the unnamed Badia. Life continues in its ancient rhythm. The crow of the rooster at dawn, the lowing of cattle in the field, the soft thud of apples falling in the frost. And in this quiet, something extraordinary begins not with a shout, not with a revelation, but with the turning of a page, the sharpening of a quill, the steady hand of a young man who finally has nothing to do but think. He sets up a small table by the window, where the morning light enters clean and direct. He arranges his tools: ink, ruler, compass, a piece of glass, a piece of paper. He begins, not with grand theories, but with questions he has carried 4 years' questions, too delicate to voice in crowded halls, too strange for academic debate. What if the force that pulls an apple to the ground is the same force that holds the moon in its path? He sketches the earth. He draws a curved knot, upward, not sideways, but around. He imagines throwing a stone faster and faster, until it no longer falls to the ground, but falls around the world, missing, eternally held. He tests it with numbers. He borrows Kepler's laws of planetary motion not as dogma, but as clues. He calculates the moon's acceleration toward Earth. He compares it to the fall of an apple, the ratio maquis within the limits of the data he has. His hand does not tremble. His breath does not quicken, but he writes the calculation 3 times, checking each step, each unit, each assumption. When it holds, he closes the notebook and walks outside into the orchard, where the frost glitters on the grass like scattered stars. He begins a new study. Light. He darkens the room, drills a small hole in the wooden shutter, and lets a single beam enter. He places the prism in its path. The spectrum unfolds on the far wall, vivid, steady, undeniable. He measures the angles. He records the spread. He wonders, is white light a mixture like music made of notes? He tested with a second prism, recombining the colors. White returns. He does not call it discovery. He calls it confirmation. In another corner of the notebook, he sketches curves, parabolas, hyperbolas, ellipses, not as abstractions, but as paths. He imagines planets tracing them through empty space, not because angels push them, but because space itself has geometry, and mass bends it, and motion follows the curve like water finding its level. He invents a new language for this, a method of fluxions what we now call calculus, a way to describe change itself, how a falling body speeds up, how a curve bends at any point, how a planet sweeps equal areas in equal times. He writes it not for publication, not for praise, but because the old mathematics cannot hold what he sees in his mind. He needs new words. So he makes them. Months pass. Winter gives way to spring. The orchard blooms white petals, drifting on the breeze like snow in reverse. He walks barefoot in the grass, feeling the damp earth beneath his feet, listening to the bees hum in the blossoms. A is not idle. He is not waiting. He's building not with stone or steel, but with concepts, with relationships, with invisible threads that connect apple and moon, light and shadow, motion and rest. No one knows what is happening in that quiet farmhouse. Not his mother. Not the villagers. Not the scholars in London who still debate whether comets are omens or objects. The world believes knowledge is made in universities, in debates, in books printed with royal approval. But here, in the stillness of the plague years, Isaac Newton shows something else. That the deepest revolutions do not begin in crowds. They begin in silence, in the patient turning of a single mind toward the light, and the courage to write, in the margin of a notebook, "This I can prove. The plague will fade. Cambridge will reopen. Life will resume its noise. But nothing, not science, not philosophy, not the human understanding of the cosmos, will ever be the same again." The fire in the hearth of Woolsthorpe Manor burns low on a winter evening, its embers pulsing faintly like a tired heart, and in the circle of light it casts, Isaac sits with two books open before him, not side by side in harmony, but at a slight angle, as if each resists the presence of the other. One is a worn copy of the King James Bible, its pages softened by years of handling, its margins filled with his careful script, not commentary on doctrine, but calculations, diagrams of planetary orbits, notes on the dimensions of the Temple of Solomon measured in cubits and reshaped. The other is a notebook, bound in plain leather, its pages dense with algebra, with sketches of light passing through prisms, with curves that describe the path of a falling body, not as divine will, but as mathematical necessity. He does not see these as enemies. He sees them as parts of a single truth waiting to be reconciled, like to halves of a lens that, when aligned, bring the world into focus. He believes that God did not create a world of chaos or caprice, but of order so deep and elegant that it hums beneath the surface of things, audible only to those willing to listen with both reason and reverence. To study nature is not to abandon faith, but to kneel in a different posture to trace the signature of the Creator, not in miracles alone, but in the silent precision of a falling apple and the unbroken curve of a planet's journey. In the hidden harmony of light divided and recombined, yet the tension is real, and it lives in him not as a shout, but as a constant, quiet pressure, like the weight of a heavy coat worn for too long. He attends chapel when he is in Cambridge, stands with the others, bows his head at the appointed times. But his mind does not rest in prayer, as others do. It drifts toward the geometry of the vaulted ceiling, toward the way sunlight slants through the stained glass, bending as it passes from air to colored lead. He wonders if the angels described in Ezekiel move in ellipses, if the firmament has thickness, if the stars are fixed or drifting. He does not write these thoughts in letters. He confines them to the innermost pages of his private notebooks, where no eye but his will ever see them. His faith is fierce, but unorthodox. He rejects the doctrine of the Trinity not out of rebellion, but because the mathematics will not hold. 3 persons in one substance feels to him like an equation with mismatched terms, a proof that collapses under its own assumptions. He reads the early church fathers in Greek, compares many traces, the evolution of doctrine through centuries of councils and compromises, and concludes, with sorrow rather than pride, that something essential was lost or added along the way. He keeps this conviction buried deep, speaking of it to no one, for to voice it openly would mean exile from the university, from the only home his mind has ever known. Even his relationships carry this same quiet friction. He longs for understanding, for a mind that can follow his thoughts to their end. Yet he recoils from the vulnerability that connection requires. When a fellow at Trinity invites him to dine, he accepts out of duty, not desire, and sits through the meal with his hands folded in his lap, answering questions with precision but offering none in return. He senses kindness in the invitation, but mistrusts it, wonders if it is genuine interest, or merely curiosity about the boy from the country who builds strange devices and reads too much. He has been left before, and the memory lives in his body like a bruise that never fully fades. The silence after his mother departed for her second marriage, the years without letters, the knowledge that love, too, can be conditional. He is not angry. He is not bitter. But he has learned to build walls, not of stone, but of silenced rooms, within rooms, each one smaller, each one more secure. His greatest discoveries are not born of joy, but of necessity. The need to make sense of a world that feels precarious, the need to find laws that do not shift with opinion or power, the need to prove first to himself that some things can be known, can be held, can be true beyond doubt. Even in his work, the conflict echoes. When he writes of gravity, he refuses to invent a cause hypothesis non fingo. He will latest a naught, because he lacks imagination, but because he refuses to fill the unknown with convenient stories. He wants the math to stand on its own, clean and unadorned, like a beam of light passing through a perfect vacuum. And yet in the privacy of his study he fills thousands of pages with alchemical experiments, with searches for the philosopher's stone, with attempts to decode biblical prophecy not as distractions from science, but as parallel paths toward the same destination, a unified understanding of all things material and spiritual, visible and hidden. One evening, after a long session calculating the orbit of the moon, he steps outside into the cold. The sky is clear, the stars sharp and unwavering. He looks up not in worship, not in fear, but in quiet pleading. He does not ask for revelation. He asks only for consistency, for coherence, for the world to hold together, not through force of will, but through the gentle, unbreakable logic of design. The wind moves through the bare branches of the apple tree, and for a moment he imagines the planets moving in the same silence, bound not by chains, but by an invisible agreement written into the fabric of space itself. He returns to his desk, closes the Bible, opens the notebook, and writes, in a steady hand, the same power that governs the fall of an apple must govern the course of the moon, or else the heavens are lawless, and God is not a mathematician. He does not cross it out. He does not underline it. He simply turns the page and continues. The summer evening settles over London like a soft mantle, the light fading not in a sudden drop, but in a slow golden hush that turns the rooftops to amber and the river to liquid bronze. And in a quiet room at Gresham College, 3 men sit around a small table where a single oil lamp glows steadily, its flame casting gentle shadows that move with the breath of the conversation as Edmund Halley, Christopher Wren, and Robert Hooke speak not of politics or trade, but of the heavens, of planets gliding across the sky in paths no one has yet proven, of forces unseen but deeply felt, of a question that has lingered in the air of learned circles like smoke after a candle has been snuffed. What shape does nature choose for the journey of a world around its sun? Wren, ever practical, offers a book handsomely bound in leather, its pages crisp and uncut, as a prize for the man who can demonstrate the answer with mathematics rather than speculation. Hooke leans back in his chair and says, with quiet confidence, that he already possesses the proof, though he keeps it folded away in his mind like a letter never sent. And Halley listens, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup, sensing not arrogance in Hooke's words, but hesitation, the kind that comes when an idea is glimpsed but not yet held. Later, as the others prepare to leave and the street outside begins to quiet with the approach of night, Halley pauses at the threshold, turns, and says softly that he intends to ride to Cambridge not to challenge, but to ask and to listen, and, though no one argues, no one encourages him either. For Newton is known not for openness, but for solitude, a man who speaks more often to prisms and pendulums than to people. The journey takes him through fields where the wheat sways in slow waves, past hedgerows humming with bees, into the green hush of the countryside where the air smells of damp earth and wood smoke. And when he arrives at Trinity College in the late afternoon, he is shown to a room whose windows face east, where the light still lingers, and where Newton rises to greet him, not with ceremony, but with the careful grace of someone accustomed to measuring time in breaths rather than hours. They speak first of ordinary things, the condition of the roads, the recent warmth of the season, a new lens Halley has seen in a London workshop, and only when the silence between sentences grows comfortable does Halley guide the conversation toward the heart of his visit, asking gently what curve a planet would trace if drawn toward the sun by a force that weakens with the square of the distance. And Newton answers without pause, his voice low, and even that such a body would move in an ellipse and win. Halley, surprised by the certainty, asks how he can be sure. Newton explains that he has already carried out the calculation and verified it through multiple approaches, though he cannot immediately produce the manuscript because it lies buried among years of notes and drafts in a cabinet beside his desk. Halley does not press for immediate proof, nor does he express doubt. Instead, he nods with a quiet understanding of a man who has spent his life reading the sky and knows the difference between guesswork and conviction. And before he departs, he asks, respectfully, without urgency, if Newton would be willing to reconstruct the work and send it when it is ready. And Newton agrees, not with enthusiasm, but with the steady commitment of someone who has long carried a weight he is now being gently invited to set down. Weeks pass, and London returns to its rhythms to clatter of carts on cobblestones, the cries of street vendors, the distant chime of church bells marking the hours until one morning a package arrives at Halley's door, wrapped in plain paper and tied with simple string, and inside he finds 9 pages of handwriting so precise, so deliberate, and so utterly complete in its reasoning that he reads them twice in silence, his fingers tracing the lines not to check for error but to feel the architecture of the thought unfolding before him. And what he sees is not merely a solution to a geometric puzzle, but a key that unlocks the motion of the moon, the rhythm of the tides, the fall of an apple from a tree, and the arc of a comet returning after decades in the dark hole, governed by the same invisible law, all expressing the same silent language of mass distance and time. He understands in that moment that what he holds is not merely a calculation, but an invitation. An invitation to see the universe not as a scattered collection of wonders shaped by chance or divine whim, but as a single, coherent whole, governed by laws that are knowable, consistent, and breathtakingly elegant, and he makes a quiet but unshakable decision, then and there, to ensure that this invitation does not remain a whispered thought buried in a drawer at Cambridge, but is instead written carefully in ink, on paper, with proofs and diagrams and reasoned argument, so that it may be offered not to a single mind, but to the world. He returns to Cambridge, this time not as a visitor, but as a steward, and finds Newton not in triumph, but in hesitation, still reluctant to publish, still wary of scrutiny, still carrying the old wounds of past disputes, and Halley does not argue, does not flatter, does not rush. Instead, he sits with him hour after hour listening as Newton expands the 9 pages into chapters, into propositions, into a vision so vast it begins to take shape, not as a pamphlet but as a book that will require years to complete, that will test Newton's patience, his health, his faith in his own mind, and that will demand of Halley not only financial support but emotional resilience. For the work is immense. The stakes are quiet, but profound, and the silence of the writing room is broken only by the scratch of the quill, the turning of a page, the soft sigh of a man trying to translate the music of the spheres into words that will last beyond his own lifetime. Outside, the world moves on King's Make War. Merchants sail new routes. Stars rise and set with indifferent precision, but inside that room, something slower and deeper is happening. Aminda is laying the first stones of a new foundation for human knowledge, not with fanfare, but with care, not for glory, but for clarity. And Halley, watching him work, knows that he is not merely funding a book. He is helping to build a bridge from the world of candlelight and uncertainty into a future where the heavens are no longer a mystery, but a map waiting to be read. The winter of 1686 settles over Cambridge not with storm, but with a deepening, quieter kind that comes when snow has fallen overnight, and the world holds its breath beneath a soft white blanket, muffling the sound of footsteps, softening the edges of rooftops and trees, and turning the light that enters Newton's window into a pale, even glow that makes the ink on the page appear almost black by contrast. Inside the room, the air is still scented with beeswax, damp wool, and the faint metallic temps of the iron nib he has just cleaned. And though the Principia is nearing its end, the work feels heavier now, not because the mathematics is harder, but because the weight of what he is creating has become undeniable. This is no longer a private exercise or a response to Halley's request. It is a new foundation for understanding the world, and once it is printed, it cannot be taken back. He writes, slowly, deliberately, crossing out, not for error, but for refinement, rewriting entire propositions not to correct, but to clarify, because he knows that future readers will not have him beside them to explain the gaps, to gesture toward the diagrams, to whisper the assumptions that live between the lines. Every word must carry its own light, every proof must stand unaided, and so he labors not for speed, but for permanence, shaping each sentence, as a stonemason shapes a keystone knowing that the arch depends on its precision. His hands bear the marks of the work. The knuckles are stiff in the cold. The skin on his right index finger is worn smooth and slightly calloused from guiding the quill, and more than once, he pauses not from fatigue, but from the quiet ache of recognition that a single mind, working in solitude, can trace the architecture of the cosmos not with divine revelation, but with patience. with logic, with the humble tools of paper and ink, and yet this clarity comes at a cost. He has missed meals, ignored letters, declined invitations, and though no one reproaches him, he feels the distance widening between himself and others, not as a rift, but as a natural consequence of choosing depth over breadth, silence over chatter, rigor over ease. Hallie visits less often now. His role has shifted from companion to guardian, ensuring the printer's proofs arrive intact, negotiating with the Royal Society to cover the growing costs, smoothing over delays with quiet diplomacy. And though he never says it aloud, he senses that Newton is not writing for approval or acclaim, but for coherence, for the deep, quiet satisfaction of seeing a truth emerge not in fragments, but whole, like a shape rising slowly from fog. And when Newton hands him the final bundle of pagestide with twine, the corners slightly softened from Handley Holly, does not exclaim, does not praise. He simply takes it, feels its weight in his hands, and says, "It will change everything." Newton does not answer. He walks to the window, where the snow has begun to fall again, slow and silent, and watches a single flake spiral downward, not in a straight line, but in a gentle curve, caught in a draft he cannot see, but can almost calculate, and in that moment, he understands that the legacy of this work will not be his name in the margin, but the quiet confidence it gives others to ask their own questions, to trust their own eyes, to believe that the universe, for all its mystery, is not arbitrary, not cruel, not chaotic, but ordered in a way that can be approached with humility and care. And though he will later feel the sting of disputes, the weariness of public life, the loneliness of being misunderstood, he also knows deep in the quiet place where his earliest questions were born that some things are worth the wait, and this, ink and paper though it may be, is one of them. He returns to his desk, not to add more, but to close the last notebook, to cap the ink, to brush the dust of dried wax from the binding, and as he does, he feels not triumph, but completion. The kind that comes not from finishing, but from knowing that what has been built can now stand on its own, long after the builder has stepped away. The publication of the Principia does not arrive with trumpets or proclamations, but with the quiet turning of pages in study rooms across Europe, where scholars lean forward in their chairs as they read propositions that reshape the very idea of motion, force, and cosmic order. And though the book is dense, written in the austere language of geometry and Latin, its implications ripple outward like rings on still water, reaching men who have spent their lives observing the same stars, measuring the same tides, and wondering about the same invisible threads that bind the world together. At the Royal Society in London, the air grows thick with conversation not loud, debate, but careful, measured discussion over tea in the library, where fellows pass the volume from hand to hand, tracing Newton's diagrams with their fingertips, testing his proofs in their own notebooks. And though admiration is real, so too is unease. For the book does not merely present new ideas, it quietly dismantles old authorities, replacing reverence for Aristotle and Descartes with a demand for demonstration. And in doing so, it shifts the center of intellectual gravity from Paris and Leiden to Cambridge, from philosophy to mathematics, from tradition to evidence. Robert Hooke feels this shift most acutely. He has long argued that planetary motion arises from a central attraction, and though he never provided the mathematical proof Newton now delivers with unassailable rigor, he believes his insight has been absorbed without acknowledgement, and when he raises the issue not in anger but with the wounded precision of a man who has spent years collecting pieces of a puzzle only to see another assemble them first, Newton does not respond with argument, but with silence. A silence so complete and so final that it becomes its own kind of answer. And from that moment onward, their correspondence ceases, not with a rupture, but with an absence, like a clock whose pendulum has simply stopped. In Germany, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz reads the Principia with deep respect, yet also with the quiet confidence of a mind that has walked a parallel path. He, too, has developed a calculus different in notation, similar in power, and, though he writes to Newton in the spirit of collegial exchange, the seeds of future conflict are already planted, not in malice, but in the simple fact that two brilliant men, working in isolation, have reached the same summit by different trails, and the world, eager for heroes and villains, will later force their rivalry into a drama they never intended to perform. Newton does not seek these tensions. He does not attend meetings to defend himself. He prefers the solitude of his rooms, the certainty of his calculations, the slow burn of candlelight over parchment. And when he is elected president of the Royal Society in 1703, Hooke's death he accepts not out of ambition, but out of duty, as one might accept the care of a fragile instrument that must be preserved. And under his leadership, the society becomes not a forum for open debate, but a guardian of rigor, of proof, of the new standard he has helped to establish. That nature speaks in mathematics, and only those who learn its language may truly listen. Yet, even in victory, there is loneliness. The same mind that could unify heaven and earth, under a single law, struggles to bridge the small distances between human beings. He writes letters that are precise but distant, attends gatherings where he speaks little and listens much, and though he is honored by Queen Anne, celebrated across Europe, remains at heart the boy who built windmills in the orchard, who measured the wind with a feather, who found comfort not in crowds, but in the quiet click of a mechanism falling into place. The shadows of rivalry do not define his legacy, but they shape it, reminding us that even the clearest light casts a shadow, and that truth, once revealed, must still navigate the imperfect terrain of human pride, memory, and longing for recognition. His hands bear the marks of the work. The knuckles are stiff in the cold. The skin on his right index finger is worn smooth and slightly calloused from guiding the quill, and more than once, he pauses not from fatigue, but from the quiet ache of recognition that a single mind, working in solitude, can trace the architecture of the cosmos, not with divine revelation, but with patience, with logic, with the humble tools of paper and incandia. This clarity comes at a cost. He has missed meals, ignored letters, declined invitations, and though no one reproaches him, he feels the distance widening between himself and others, not as a rift, but as a natural consequence of choosing depth over breadth, silence over chatter, rigor over ease. Halley visits less often now. His role has shifted from companion to guardian, ensuring the printer's proofs arrive intact, negotiating with the Royal Society to cover the growing costs, smoothing over delays with quiet diplomacy. And though he never says it aloud, he senses that Newton is not writing for approval or acclaim, but for coherence, for the deep, quiet satisfaction of seeing a truth emerge not in fragments, but whole, like a shape rising slowly from fog. And when Newton hands him the final bundle of pages dyed with twine, the corners slightly softened from handling, Halley does not exclaim, does not praise. He simply takes it, feels its weight in his hands, and says, "It will change everything." Newton does not answer. He walks to the window, where the snow has begun to fall again, slow and silent, and watches a single flake spiral downward, not in a straight line, but in a gentle curve. Caught in a draft he cannot see, but can almost calculate, and in that moment, he understands that the legacy of this work will not be his name in the margin, but the quiet confidence it gives others to ask their own questions, to trust their own eyes, to believe that the universe, for all its mystery, is not arbitrary, not cruel, not chaotic, but ordered in a way that can be approached with humility and care. And though he will later feel the sting of disputes, the weariness of public life, the loneliness of being misunderstood, he also knows deep in the quiet place, where his earliest questions were born, that some things are worth the wait, and this, ink and paper though it may be, is one of them. He returns to his desk, not to add more, but to close the last notebook, to cap the inkwell, to brush the dust of dried wax from the binding, and as he feels not triumph, but completion, the kind that comes not from finishing, but from knowing that what has been built can now stand on its own, long after the builder has stepped away. In the quiet hours after midnight, when the rest of London has long since settled into sleep and even the watchman's footsteps have faded into the distance, a single window in Cranberry Park glows with the steady light of an oil lamp, its flame unwavering behind thick glass, and inside, an older Newton sits not at his desk of papers and proofs, but at a long wooden table stained with decades of use, its surface marked by rings of hot crucibles, scratches from glass rods, and the faint stubborn residue of dried salts and powders that no amount of scrubbing can fully erase. The air is warm, almost close, scented with sulfur, vinegar, and the dry, earthy smell of crushed antimony, and around him rest the tools of a different kind of inquiry. Alembics of greenish glass, bell jars clouded with age, mortar and pestles worn smooth by years of grinding, and notebooks not the crisp, ordered volumes of the Principia, but thick, irregular folios bound in leather, softened by handling, their pages dense with cramped script, diagrams of furnaces, lists of ingredients measured not in grams but in symbolic weights, and margins filled with biblical citations in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin, each passage underlined, cross-referenced, annotated with the same fierce attention he once gave to the motion of the moon. He is not, as later ages would imagine, a man divided between science and superstition. He is a man united by a single conviction that truth is one, and that the same mind that designed the orbits of the planets also inscribed meaning into scripture and coded prophecy into chronology and hid divine signatures in the transformations of matter. To study alchemy is not to chase gold, but to witness pure. To decode prophecy is not to predict doom, but to uncover pattern. To calculate the dimensions of Solomon's temple is not to indulge in antiquarianism, but to measure the geometry of divine order. For over 30 years he has pursued this work in silence, filling more than 1 million words, more than all his mathematical and optical writings. Combined with reflections on the prima materia, the philosopher's stone to the soul of the world, and though he publishes none of it, he guards the manuscripts fiercely, locking them in iron-bound chests, hiding them among theological trees, knowing that a world newly enamored of reason would misunderstand, not his methods, but his motive. He does not seek to command nature, but to understand its deepest language, the one spoken before Babel, before division, before the split between sacred and profane. He melts metals not to enrich himself, but to observe transformation, to watch lead soften and flow, to see how silver separates from dross when heated just so, to trace the moment when a substance ceases to be one thing and becomes another, as if witnessing the slow turn of a cosmic hinge. He distills liquids, not for elixirs, but for clara to see what rises, what remains, what condenses back into form, as if reading the breath of the world itself. And in the quiet hiss of steam and the crackle of charcoal and the slow crystallization of a solution cooling overnight, he hears not magic, but method the same patient. Unfolding, he observed in light through a prism in apples falling from a tree, in planets tracing their silent arcs. The Royal Society knows only the public Newton, the president, the mathematician, the defender of the Principia, but the private Newton, the one who rises before dawn to check the progress of a fermentation, who copies ancient manuscripts by hand to compare variants of a single verse, who calculates the dates of biblical events with the same precision he applied to lunar motion, remains hidden, not out of shame, but out of reverence. He believes some truths are too fragile for the marketplace of ideas, too easily broken by mockery or misinterpretation, and so he writes them down, not for fame, but for fidelity, as one might copy a sacred text by candlelight, knowing that the act of transcription is itself a form of prayer. One evening, after a long session heating a mixture of mercury and sulphurets fumes, carefully vented through a clay pipe to the Gartney sets aside his tongs, washes his hands in a basin of rose water, and opens a small psalter bound in worn velvet. He does not read for comfort, but for correspondence. Tracing the words of Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands, and in the margin, in faint ink, he adds a single note, and the work is legible. He does not mean that God's will is obvious, or that revelation is easy, but that the universe is not muted. It speaks in ratios, in symmetries and transformations, in light and force and time, and that to listen carefully, whether with a prism, a crucible, or a Hebrew lexicon, is to draw nearer to the source of all coherence. The world will forget this Newton. It will remember the laws, the optics, the calculus, the knighted scholar, but not the man who spent his nights not chasing immortality, but seeking unity, not hoarding secrets, but honoring depth, not rejecting faith, but demanding that it be as rigorous as geometry. Yet in the quiet of his study, as the flame flickers and the crucible cools, he knows without needing to say it aloud that the alchemist, the theologian, and the mathematician are not three men, but one. A seeker who believed that to understand the world was to kneel, and that to kneel was not to surrender reason, but to enter it more deeply. The apple tree at Woolsthorpe still stands, though its branches have grown heavier with time, its bark thicker, its roots deeper in the Lincolnshire soil, and on quiet afternoons, when the wind is gentle and the light falls in long golden slants across the orchard, apples still detach from their stems with the same soft certainty they did more than 3 centuries ago, not with drama, not with warning, but with the quiet inevitability of a truth that needs no announcement to remain true. You do not need to know Newton's name to live inside his legacy. You feel it every time a satellite glides silently overhead, tracing its path with the same mathematics that once described the moon's pull. You feel it when a bridge holds firm against the wind, its curves and tensions calculated not by guesswork, but by laws refined from his first quiet inquiries. You feel it in the steady tick of a grandfather clock, in the smooth arc of a thrown ball, in the way light bends through a raindrop to form a rainbow each, one a small echo of a mind that chose to listen, deeply and without haste. To the world as it is, children today, lying on their backs in summer grass, still watch apples fall and wonder why they do not rise instead. And in that moment, they stand in the same place Newton once stood, not as geniuses, not as scholars, but as human beings touched by curiosity, the same quiet spark that has lit every great leap forward. Not wheat fire, but with attention. His notebooks rest now in glass cases, their ink faded, but still legible, their pages turned only by gloved hands in hushed rooms. And though the alchemical recipes, the theological meditations, the private doubts are no longer hidden, they are also no longer strange. We begin to understand that the man who gave us calculus and the laws of motion was not a machine of reason, but a seeker tender, stubborn, devout, flawed, trying to reconcile the world he measured with the mystery he revered. When you look up at the night sky and see the stars not as distant lights, but as places governed by the same rules that shape your own breath and heartbeat, that is Newton's gift, not the equations themselves, but the quiet confidence they give you to believe that the universe is not arbitrary, not hostile, not beyond understanding, but ordered in a way that invites us to draw closer, to ask gently, to wait patiently for the answer to reveal itself. And as you listen now, in the comfort of your room, with the day's weight slowly lifting from your shoulders, know that you are part of this continuity, not as a student, not as a historian, but as a witness. Whose he was. The same stars he saw still turn above Woolsthorpe. The same moon still pulls the tides. The same questions still rise in the silence between thoughts. And somewhere, in a quiet corner of the world, a child is building a windmill from scraps of wood, measuring the wind with a feather, watching the shadows move across the floor, and wondering. The apple still falls. We are still watching. And the wondering, soft, patient, deeply human, has not stopped. It has only changed hands. The night deepens now, and the stars above Woolsthorpe appear one by one, not in haste, but with the quiet confidence of old friends returning to their places, their light traveling centuries just to meet your eyes in this moment. And as you listen, perhaps with your breath slowed and your body at rest, know that you have walked beside a man who spent his life not chasing fame, but seeking coherence, not commanding nature, but learning its language, not separating faith from reason, but weaving them together like two threads in the same quiet fabric. Thank you for being here, not as a student, not as a historian, but as a companion on this gentle journey through time, for allowing your mind to soften, to wander the orchards and study rooms of another age, to hear the scratch of a quill, the rustle of an apple falling, the low hum of a mind at work in the stillness. You do not need to remember every detail, every date, every law. What matters is the feeling, the sense that wonder is not childish, but essential. That solitude is not emptiness, but space for thought to take root. That the world, for all its complexity, is not hostile, but knowable. and that to ask a question softly and wait patiently for the answer is one of the most human things we can do. If you would like to share where in time or where in the world you are listening from tonight, know that your presence is held with warmth and gratitude, not as data, but as connection, a quiet thread linking us across distance and hour. Whose does Newton's question still link us across centuries? And if you would like to return for another story, another quiet hour among the thinkers, dreamers, and builders of our shared past, the channel will be here not with urgency, but with openness, like a door left slightly ajar, a lamp lit in the window, a notebook open on the desk, waiting for the next gentle voice to join the circle. For now, let yourself rest. Let the rhythm of your breath grow deeper, slower, more even. Feel the support beneath you, the bed, the couch, the chair holding you with the same quiet reliability that the earth holds the moon in its path. Let the images of candlelight, parchment, apple blossoms, and starlit skies settle softly into your thoughts, not as lessons to retain, but as companions for the journey into sleep. The apple still falls. The stars still turn. The questions still rise, soft and unbroken. And you are exactly where you need to be. Let the stars carry you home, and may your dreams be calm, coherent, and full of quiet light.